Hello, Am Yisrael. This is Yaron Reuven speaking to you here from Jerusalem, and we're a few days away from Passover, celebrating the exile from Egypt. Many Jews around the world, unfortunately, are no longer close to Hashem, no longer close to Torah and mitzvot, and we're here to remind you that this is a time of when we became Am Yisrael. Of course, we all know the story of Egypt and the Exodus. Even the people that are not close to the Torah and mitzvot have watched a movie at some point or another that told them at least part of the story of this guy named Moses that took them, Am Yisrael, out of Egypt, out of slavery, destroying the largest nation in history, and putting them in such a situation where they literally begged their slaves, Am Yisrael, to leave. Am Yisrael later on saw many, many miracles and eventually received the Torah. Now, this part about the Torah is the part that we all forgot. We like the stories, we like the plagues, we like the fact that Am Yisrael still lives on till today, despite the fact that many of its enemies throughout the generations have been destroyed. But one thing that Passover is supposed to remind us of is why. Why was Am Yisrael chosen by the Creator above to lead the world, to be a light to the nations, to be the one that's going to be an example for each other and for everyone around us? Why is it a small civilization, yet the one that's survived all of the wars, all of the destruction, all of the Holocaust that have happened throughout generations? Many people can connect to the Holocaust that happened just around 70 years ago, unfortunately, to Am Yisrael, where 6 million Jews were killed and tortured day after day. But what many of us don't know is that the story of the Exodus begins with something much, much worse than the Holocaust could ever be. Millions upon millions of Jews were killed over 210 years by the evil Egyptians. And this, unfortunately, is continuing till today. Maybe we're not being killed by the same force like we were in the past. Maybe we're not being killed by guns or swords or whips. But what we are being killed is by ignorance, by not knowing the roots of our nation. Paro, the evil Paro, when his story began in the beginning of Exodus, says that he did not remember Moses, did not remember Yosef HaTzadik. What does it mean he did not remember him? It means that despite all of the good that Joseph did for the nation of Egypt, making them wealthy, putting them on the map, Paro forgot, but electively forgot. Forgot not because he didn't have the money anymore, forgot not because there was no recollection of who Joseph was, but rather forgot because remembering a favor that someone did for you is very difficult for some people. And this is the way the story begins. The lack of gratefulness by Paro made him hated by Hashem Yitbarach. This, as the sages tell us in the Gemara, Hashem hates certain types of people. One of them is someone that's ungrateful. First thing we need to learn about Passover is that it's a time to be grateful. Another lesson that we learn after that is that despite the difficulties that we went through in Egypt, despite the difficulties that we went through day after day, being tortured and having our children killed on a day-to-day basis, Hashem never forgot us. Hashem will never forget us. Hashem was just putting us through a test to see if we truly love Him, to see if we're going to yearn for Him, scream for Him, ask for Him. Eventually we did. Eventually we got to the point where Hashem answered our call. And when He did, miracles after miracle continued to happen until we not only left Egypt in such a extraordinary, miraculous way, but left Egypt in a way where they no longer ever wanted to be involved with us and they were no longer remembered. The Egypt of today is not the Egypt that we had 3,300 years ago. How did Hashem do all of this without necessarily making it so obvious to the point where after only one plague, the Egyptians would let us go? Hashem's punishments and Hashem's reward are always midah versus midah. Measure for measure. Just like the Egyptians did not let the Jews do the mitzvah of pu'ubu the way that they're supposed to by going to the mikveh each month, did not let us bathe, did not let us maintain our hygiene. Hashem said, oh, you don't want my children to commit this big mitzvah that I gave since the beginning of time? Fine. You're also not going to be able to use this water. And he turned the water into blood. But not just turning the water into blood, turning everything that have any connection whatsoever to water to blood. Just like Rabbi Ephraim Kachlin just said in Hebrew, we learned that even the oranges, even the walls, any fruit, anything that had any water in it whatsoever at one point or another, that water turned into blood. So this answers the question of why didn't the Egyptians just drink orange juice or milk or something else? Because Hashem wanted to make sure that everyone knows he has complete control over nature. So everything and anything that had anything to do with water turned into blood. The same goes with the frogs. Initially, we see that the plague is mentioned in the Torah as tzfardeim, which is frogs. But later, when the plague actually arrives, it says tzfardea, it says one frog. What happens to the tzfardeim? What happened to the plural? Here we learn that originally Hashem sent one giant frog. One frog to see how terrible the Egyptians really are to themselves. How terrible anger is to us. The Egyptians saw this large frog and hid it. And they hid it, and more frogs came out of it. And they hid it again, and more frogs would come out of it. And it got to the point where, despite the fact that they knew that after hundreds and hundreds of times of hitting this frog, more and more frogs would come out of it. They knew that this is not working. But their anger, just like the Ramban says, when someone has anger, all types of Gehenom control him. Their anger did not let them stop. Their anger made sure that they continued hitting it, thinking that maybe, just maybe I could hurt it. Even though I'm going to die with it, at least I know I'm going to hurt it. And this is the second thing we need to learn about Passover. This is a time that we get together with family from all over the world, from all over the neighborhoods. It's a time that it's easy to get angry. It's a time that it's easy to lose your temper. But it's the worst possible time to do that. Because all the little children that have never heard the true story behind Egypt, the true story of Am Yisrael, the true story of Hashem Yitbarach and the miracle of the Exodus, of Yetziat Mitzrayim, they're not going to be able to tolerate it. If you show anger during this time, you could easily lose a child forever. Not lose him physically, but lose the connection that he has with Hashem. Because if he associates Hashem and the Exodus with anger in the home, he's no longer going to want to celebrate it. The same goes with every single one of the plagues. This is why one of the major obligations of Passover is to learn the Midrashim. You should use Midrash Rabbah, Me'am Loez, and many other Midrashim that tell you the story of Egypt and what truly happened there. It's not the movie. Trust me when I tell you. It's much more than the movie could ever tell you. It tells you the story behind the story. To prepare for PeSach. To prepare for the Leil HaSeder. Why? Because when your kids arrive, when your uncles and aunts arrive, when your cousins that are far away from Torah and Mitzvot arrive, it's your obligation to bring them back. Chazal tells us that only two things are going to save us at the time of Mashiach. Torah and Gemilut Chasadim. Torah obviously doesn't just mean to know what a Torah is. Torah means complying with it, reading it, learning it, connecting to it. Because this is our direct contact with Hashem. This is the most important obligation a Jew could ever have. This is why Hashem says, let them leave me but not my Torah. Because he knows that once we have Torah, we know our way back home. But when it comes to Gemilut Chasadim, many people are confused. They think that if they give someone a ride to the laundromat or to the movie theater or to somewhere else, that's going to save them at the time of Mashiach. Yes, it's nice. Yes, it's wonderful. But unfortunately, it's not going to save us. The reason why is because even if you help that one person get to the laundromat, if right after the laundromat he gets his clothes dry cleaned so he can go to the club, and he never knows what God is, he never knows that there's a deen and there's a dayan. There's a judge, there's judgment and there's a judge. If he doesn't know that the Torah is not just a history book, but rather a book of laws, a book of instructions of how to live life, then that person, you did him no favor at all. All you helped him do is make another sin. The most important chesed that one can do in our generation and any generation before or after us is to help them do tshuva. Help them come back to Hashem in such a way that they'll never leave again. The only way they can do that is by finding out the story. Finding out the true love that Hashem has for Am Yisrael, that's so unique, that's so extraordinary, that's so beyond anything we could ever comprehend, that by itself makes that person fall in love with Hashem. Because when you know someone loves you, immediately you fall in love with them too. When you know that Hashem is doing everything He's doing just for you, yes, you, the one that's watching this, every single one of you, everything that's created, the heaven and the earth and everything in between was created for you. It's actually an obligation for a Jew to remind himself of that everything in the world was created for them. Not to make them egotistical, not to make them selfish, but rather to make them realize that they themselves can change the world. This is what we are supposed to do during PeSach. Each one of us is supposed to change the world in one way or another. Each one of us is supposed to tell the story of God, the story of how God created the world, and within this amazing, perfect world, He created a unique nation, a chosen nation, which He called Am Yisrael. And for this nation, He did everything and anything possible to make sure that they realize this love exists, ultimately to arrive to give them the love letter that we call the Torah. It's your obligation, dear Jew, to remind yourself of this, to remind your children, to remind your family of why we celebrate this holiday. It's not just about food, it's not just about hotels, or it's not just about the fun part. It's about knowing where we came from. And if we know where we came from, our direction ahead, our road ahead, becomes much, much clearer. So may all of you have a happy Pesach, a Chag Sameach, a Chag that's full of blessing and connection to Hashem that's never going to be broken. Not today, not in the past, and not in the future.